Welcome to Around the Empire. I'm your host, Joanne Leon. Around the Empire podcast, listener-supported independent media. Pitch in if you can, patreon.com/aroundtheempire or paypal.me/aroundtheempirepod. Also, please like, share, and subscribe on YouTube. Mark Sleboda joins us today, and we talk about recent events in Ukraine and what has developed into a crisis of confidence for Ukrainian President Zelensky. It resulted in a reshuffling in Zelensky's cabinet, a no-confidence vote in the Rada, and no progress on bringing the civil conflict to an end. Also threats from the ultranationalist factions, and a strong opposition to Zelensky's neoliberal economic policy proposals. Recent polls have also shown a larger lack of confidence in the legitimacy of the post-Maidan government itself. We also talk about the Ukrainian oligarch Kolomoisky and the Biden Burisma Affair. Mark is an International Affairs and Security Analyst, a U.S. Navy veteran, a university lecturer, and a foreign policy realist. We recorded this on March 10th, 2020. Mark Sleboda is here speaking to us from Moscow. Hello, Mark. Thanks so much for coming back on the show.
Hi, Joanne. Thanks for having me. It's always an honor and a pleasure to be on Around the Empire.
Thanks so much. I appreciate it. So today we're going to try to talk about two topics, a quick update on the situation in Ukraine, and then we're going to talk more about Syria because there's a lot going on in Syria. But let's just start with a quick update on Ukraine. I've been hearing something about people, Zelensky's cabinet being kind of wiped out, people removed by no confidence votes in their parliament, and it's a bit confusing. Particularly the prosecutor general situation has gotten a lot of attention here because of the Biden Burisma situation, and maybe you can. And also, I heard that no confidence vote was not a straight party of the people, Zelensky's new political party. I may have gotten that name wrong.
Servant of the People
party. It wasn't a straight servant of the party people. It was a combination of some from his party and some from the older, more pro-Russia parties. So I thought that was curious, and I thought maybe you could give us a sense of what's going on with Zelensky's government.
Sure. Okay. So I believe the last time we talked, there was a round of the Normandy format meetings between the new Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, Putin representing Russia, Macron representing France, and Angela Merkel representing Germany. And as a result of that meeting, there was a significant prisoner exchange, prisoners of war, prisoners of political, imprisonment on both sides. That definitely did occur. And it was considered a fairly substantial exchange. I don't think it doesn't completely exhaust everyone, but it wasn't a substantial exchange of the people held by either side. Of course, the majority of those released, every one of them released from the Ukrainian side, were not actually Russian citizens. They were citizens of Ukraine. Particularly citizens of Eastern Ukraine who have never accepted the West-backed Maidan putsch in 2014 and were imprisoned either under charges of separatism or political treason or simply posting something pro-Russian in a blog or an article and so on. So since then, there has not been any substantial progress on a move to peace in Eastern Ukraine, nor do I expect that there will be. because during that meeting and since, Zelensky has made it perfectly clear what has been obvious for, going back to the Poroshenko years, well into that the regime in Kiev has no intention and really no ability to fulfill the Minsk protocols as written. They do not accept them. They do not accept the ordering. They do not accept the principles of holding elections of any type in Donbass without getting full control of the province first. Having it literally under their jackboot, with the separatists disarmed, as the separatists, as they call them anyway, the people of Donbass disarmed, and with their rules, which have banned leftist parties, the once prominent Communist Party of Ukraine, etc. And they also refuse to enact any type of federalization of Ukraine that would devolve powers, at least specifically to the Donbass. The idea from the people of Donbass being that, this is you overthrew the government that we democratically elected to office in Kiev. We have never accepted that. In order for us to rejoin Ukraine at this point, we need some certainty of local protection of our politics, of our people, of our safety for everything that has happened since. And Zelensky either doesn't support these measures or realizes that instituting them would cause a backlash from, you want to say, the political right, the nationalists, the ultranationalists, the Banderite fascists, those grouped around Poroshenko in his new Party of European Solidarity, as it's rather ironically called, that they have known that if there's any steps made that would be regarded by them as as they call it, a capitulation to Russia, that they would basically seek to overthrow Zelensky again, and or as happened in 2014 with the Maidan. And even if they were not successful without having the full support of the West or so on, they would doubtless cause huge political turmoil in Ukraine, and it could very well be the end of the Maidan regime, at least as it exists today. It would fracture the liberal ultranationalist alliance, that saw them seize and hold power since then. But it's not. Zelensky has made clear that he doesn't intend to fulfill it, and in fact, he has issued Putin an ultimatum that that Russia had better present him with a deal he can accept within a year, or ...
Or he's going to roll his army into eastern Ukraine again. Yeah,
I don't know. I find that somewhat unlikely. And actually, Zelensky has been very adamant all along that that he is seeking to prevent military conflict. There is the possibility he could just say, as some ultranationalist West Ukrainians have argued, just let the Donbass go. We don't need them. In fact, bringing them back into our political system would threaten everything that we have created since then, because then they would reconstitute a whole Eastern Ukrainian voting bloc. The Eastern Ukraine already votes against the Maidan parties and always has, so that they don't really want Donbass back under terms that the people of Donbass don't live or vote there. There have even been suggestions that they not be allowed to vote, that they simply be incorporated back for a number of years until they are properly absorbed back into the new Maidan Ukraine. So anyway, he's not going to fulfill the Minsk protocols. That basically puts the entire peace process on a hold. He still refuses. Number one, he refuses to meet with the leaders of Donbass. He doesn't recognize that they have any legitimacy. That's okay. They don't recognize that he has any legitimacy either. But there can't really be any peace and reconciliation if he refuses to even meet with them. I mean, that's the equivalent of Russia saying, well, there's no point meeting with Zelensky. We'll only have, meetings on the future of Ukraine with the United States and France and Germany.
Yeah. So that
So,
means all of his goals, and his objectives in getting elected are, starting to go out the window, and he's seeming more like a Poroshenko. I didn't know that Poroshenko still had that much power, but
he does. I mean, they still have about 30%. They got about 30% of the Rada, the parliament. They still, they are the opposition now. Primarily because, there is probably it's better to say that there are three big factions in the Rada now. There is the Servant of the People Party, right? Zelensky's entirely new instituted party. But I think, as we spoke last time, I pointed out that there's no ideological cohesion or political cohesion among them. One, because none of them have ever served in politics before, and two, because Zelensky didn't make clear what his ideological platform or policies would be during his campaign. In fact, he was deliberately vague on that, which is what helped him get elected. He got elected simply on a toss the Maidan bums out, but keep the Maidan angle. It was particularly an anti-corruption angle. He promised peace, but didn't say how he would institute it. And there is somewhat of a decrease in violence. The artillery shelling and snipering back and forth along the contact line has gone down slightly, since some forces were moved back as a precondition to the Normandy format meeting earlier this year that we talked about. There just hasn't been any progress since then. So there's still a frozen conflict. People, military, militants, civilians, on both sides of the contact line are dying on a regular basis, maybe slightly less than before. And Zelensky is having a lot of domestic political problems. He has revealed, at least, that his plans to improve Ukraine's economic situation come from what he calls a libertarian. It is possible viewing it as a neoliberal economic policies as well. He wanted to raise utility prices, as the EU association agreement and the IMF demand, and that has been roundly trashed by the Ukrainian public, the media, the other political parties, etc. And he has his other big signature proposal was to privatize vast tracts of state-owned Ukrainian agricultural land. And this has also met with huge political resistance, with the majority of the Ukrainian people, quite obviously from the polls, being strongly against this. And that puts, his two substantial economic reform bills, the direction he would like to move the country, at least economically, really in doubt. And it has caused a lot of political chaos. And there has been a lot of disagreements on economic policy and other things, political policy, so on, between him and his former prime minister, whom he only in the last week got rid of, as long with slightly more than half of the Ukrainian cabinet, the government, as it were, not the Rada, but the Ukrainian cabinet. And right now there's a great deal of political turmoil. The forces of Poroshenko's party and the ultranationalists that they are at least allied with, some of them are a part of Poroshenko's party. They're crying that he's moving too close to what they call the pro-Russian forces in the Ukrainian Rada, i.e., the forces of particularly of the regime-controlled Donbass and the rest of East Ukraine that, of course, still don't vote for the Maidan governments. They voted for the former Party of Regions was dissolved and liquidated. Lustrated, as they called it, by the Maidan. The Communist Party and several other leftist parties were banned, and what emerged was a party called the Opposition Bloc. And this is really kind of a faux opposition party. It is the oligarchs of eastern Ukraine who acquiesced to the Maidan and decided to play along to a limited extent, but still try to protect their interests, as that is the only opposition party that is really allowed to the Maidan. The people of eastern Ukraine, in the quote elections unquote that have happened since, have voted overwhelmingly for that party, particularly the Donbass area. Other parties of eastern Ukraine, they voted equally for servant of the people, again in a bid simply to get rid of Poroshenko more than anything else, and somewhat for the opposition bloc. But he's now seen as being too close to several former officials from the Yanukovych era. Never mind, of course, that Poroshenko was also an official from a government official from the Yanukovych era. That doesn't seem to bother anyone. But there's a lot of political turmoil, and once again, the ultranationalists are already talking about overthrowing him once again, and there have been open articles about it, even in Foreign Affairs magazine by the Ukrainian Canadian ultranationalist fanatic IR scholar Alexander Motyl and others. So Ukraine is kind of embroiled in their own political problems right now, and there's kind of a confidence of crisis in Zelensky's government. His approval rating has dropped to just around 50% from the 70% that it was, and is continuing a downward trend. And the number of Ukrainians who feel the country is moving in the right direction has dropped to around 38 to 40%. Mm. At the same time, there was a poll out, again, by Ukrainian Polling Institute, a reputable poll, that asked questions about the Maidan. And 45% of those said they regarded it as a glorious revolution, right? The revolution of dignity, as they called it. But 41% of Ukrainians felt that it was either a coup or an illegitimate regime change.
Okay.
And that poll, of course, does not include the areas of the DNR and LNR, the parts of Donbass that aren't controlled by the government, and of course, it doesn't include the Crimea. And that gives you a firm indication, again, of how divided the country is still as divided politically as it was before the Maidan. 6 years later, however, quietly, at least with regarding what actually happened on the Maidan. And there was a question asking if the Maidan happened again today, how many people would support it again? And only 38% of people said so.
Okay, that's really significant, because if you added in the people from Crimea and the Donbass, you'd get a very high percentage,
Yeah.
Maybe even almost 100%. I don't know. Probably
but
not.
That isn't as shocking as you might believe, because actually, of course, polls at the time that the Maidan was occurring showed for several months in a row, during the Maidan, in repeated polling, that a majority of Ukrainians were against the Maidan. I mean, something that, of course, is not reported. This was reported in the then American run and owned, it's still, pro-Maidan, the Kiev Post.
Yeah.
Yeah, and those polls aren't discussed at all, of course, and they do show a divided country because it showed a bare majority, or in the other a bare plurality against the Maidan, while nearly as many were pro Maidan. But it certainly showed it wasn't a universally approved revolution of the people against the government. It was the people who lost the last election overthrowing the government that did get elected.
Yeah. Now the oligarchs in the East who are making up this faux opposition or controlled opposition, somewhat opposition party. Who are we talking about there? Are we talking about Kolomoisky and because
No,
he's
yeah,
complicated, right? He's
yeah. Kolomoisky is entire. Of course, many people view him as the patron of Zelensky,
yeah,
and it's almost certain that that's true to a certain extent. And there's no question that his television channel helped Zelensky get elected. It's his television channel that Zelensky's show where he played the president before he became the president, also named Servant of the People, was aired on. And again, every television station in Ukraine is owned by a different oligarch, and that's which Ukrainian politics is still to a large extent behind the scenes about which oligarch do your clan or employment loyalties lie with. And Kolomoisky has said some rather explosive things in the press. I believe it was more a deliberate provocation than any honest sentiment. But in the last few months, he gave an interview to the Western press, newspapers, where he suggested that Ukraine, because the EU is not helping Ukraine and never would accept them, that they'd be better off turning back to Russia. And I believe that was a provocation to try to get a reaction, and also because he's extremely angry about continued attempts in the West to make sure that he doesn't get his bank, which was nationalized during the latter half of Poroshenko's reign, back.
private bank, right?
Right, yeah, private bank, or private bank, I guess you could say in English. And it was this bank through which a large amount of the IMF funding, tens of billions of dollars that the West shoveled into the Maidan regime in Kiev in order to prop it up, was passed through this bank, and a large portion of it disappeared, of course, because corruption, Ukraine, oligarchs, Kolomoisky, and they weren't happy about that, and they weren't happy about the provocative nature. Now, on the other hand, Kolomoisky was, and as far as anyone knows, continues, despite being a Jewish oligarch and having well, actually, he's got like 3 or 4 citizenships. One of them is certainly with Israel. He's certainly Jewish, and Zelensky is regarded as a Jewish president, even if he's not really practicing. He's certainly of East Ukrainian Jewish descent. But Kolomoisky was the funder, the backer of Azov. And as far as anyone knows, continues to be where they get their funding from. The Banderite fascist battalion, and now political movement as the national cause. They are all caught up in the Ukrainian government now, in the National Guard. They control the Veterans Association in the government as well. They are all intermixed with the government, and that's despite the fact, of course, that they were at least originally, and it's presumed still funded by a Jewish oligarch, and that the president of the government that they're still intermingled with, and there has been no move against them, is Jewish. And why is this? And they'll often point that as an inconsistency. Oh, the Russians said that Ukraine is full of fascists, but they've got a Jewish president, and Kolomoisky is a Jewish oligarch, and so on. Well, I mean, that is a deal that has been made again and again, and it's as long as the Banderite fascist principal hatred is to ethnic Ukrainians, leftists, and Slovak East Ukrainians, as it called, right? Those who would prefer to keep a brotherly relationship with Russia, then those oligarchs, those Jewish oligarchs and others are perfectly fine with supporting fascists against them.
And they don't feel
It's
threatened by them,
they
obviously.
don't well, not immediately threatened, right? Of course they would intend to get rid of them when it's convenient.
Right.
We're just 6 years later and it has never been convenient. And the ultranationalists, the Banderite fascists, they regard the Jewish oligarchs and the Jewish President Zelensky in the same manner, right? Both sides regard them as using the other. And this is the same kind of deal that was made, as it were, the maybe not a formal deal. I mean, it's not like a cabal, but the acceptance of these, what there are of Ukrainian pro-Western liberals who genuinely wanted to join the EU, and the West Ukrainian ultranationalists who look to the Nazi collaborators of the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists and the Ukrainian Insurgent Army, whose principal figure among them was Stefan Bandera, as their idea of the founding fathers of the Ukrainian state. There was this unholy combination of these political forces that was what overthrew the government of the corrupt, flawed, it must be said, government of Viktor Yanukovych. But that was overwhelmingly elected by Eastern Ukraine, and that's still the conflict that we have today. And then if anyone tells you, there wouldn't be a civil war there if it wasn't for Russia, well, there wouldn't have been a successful Maidan completely overthrowing the government without the open Western backing and then propping upping of it either. And when you've got political polls out that showing that nearly 41% of Ukrainians, not counting Donbass and Crimea, regard that the Maidan was an illegitimate change of a coup or another illegitimate change of government, that tells you right now why there is still a civil conflict in Ukraine. And Zelensky is still sitting on top of all of this, and kind of floundering with his political inexperience, his political party, which is not of one mind, his disagreements with his own former prime minister Goncharok, and now grumblings of discontent from the nationalists, that he's leaning a little too close on not, I wouldn't say an alliance, but cutting deals with the nominally pro-Russian, at least meaning not rabidly anti-Russian opposition bloc, in order to govern and try to get bills passed.
Right, right. And then just real quick, what do we know about the situation with the prosecutor and Burisma? And, I don't know if you've seen this. There's an article on Naked Capitalism. It's actually from several years ago, questioning the ownership of Burisma and, saying that it's possible that Kolomoisky himself may be a sort of the covert owner of Burisma. Do you know if there's any truth to that?
Yeah,
And
I haven't seen that it's not outside the realm of possibility, but I think it's more like he had a hand in it, as he has a hand in so much, but that he wasn't a principal owner or shareholder. And with regards to the official corruption investigation being opened into Burisma Holdings and the corruption around Joe Biden and his son Hunter Biden, who was given this position on Burisma Holdings board for doing no work whatsoever, never even being there, knowing nothing about energy company, knowing nothing about what he was hired to do, except simply, to curry favor with his father, who was acting as the proconsul of Ukraine. But I would not expect anything to come of this investigation, no matter who the prosecutor general is. Just understand that this case was opened by certain political factions, kind of beneath the carpet, as it were, in Ukraine, that are trying to curry favor with the Trump administration, which they view as likely now to win re-election in the United States. Something that isn't quite clear to me, but is looking to be like it might actually be possible again with a divided Democratic Party, and it's I don't expect anything because. I mean, to be perfectly honest, there were no Ukrainian laws that were broken, right?
Okay.
There are certainly ethical breaches beyond things. The crime that was committed is that the Ukrainian government was overthrown, and Joe Biden was serving as President Obama's, proconsul. Yeah. But that's not a crime that you can pursue in courts. The legal courts of Ukraine. This is more a political. This is political maneuvering going on, and Zelensky is still trying to walk a very fine line. He does not want to take sides between the Republicans and the Democrats in Washington because he realizes what a
it's like a time
death
bomb
sentence.
for him.
That could be for him. It's already clear to him. I mean, he still has not met with Trump, something that he very much wanted to do as a kind of symbolic gesture that the U.S. supports him and his government in Ukraine, and Trump still has no interest in meeting with him. He's already gotten the cold shoulder from the U.S. He doesn't want that to be even worse if Trump wins re-election. Of course, neither does he want to alienate Democrats. Joe Biden, at least, would be much more favorable towards his government if he was elected, but it's not something that he can count on. I understand that is not dominating Ukrainian politics at this moment. This is an American matter, and it's a little bit about currying favor, again, some Ukrainian political forces getting this case accepted. Don't expect it to go anywhere, and understand that is that the Ukrainian, the Rada, the Ukrainian government, Zelensky, everything, they're much more concerned about their own internal problems right now than they are about anything that's happening with Trump's reelection or Joe Biden or corruption investigations. That is only interesting to them insofar as how it affects the future of their support from the United States.
Right. I feel like the Burisma thing it could be a Pandora's box, a lot more to it than anybody wants to find out or allowed to get out in the open. Like perhaps Burisma was used as a vehicle for other things.
But I mean, there's no question that Burisma Holdings was one of the most corrupt companies in Ukraine. I mean, it and the oligarch who owned it were under investigation in the UK at the time, for corruption, for money laundering, for fraud, for all types of things. At the same time that that Hunter Biden accepted a position on their board. There's no question that they're corrupt and dirty as the day is long, and they were probably involved in corrupt energy dealings with Russia that saw transit deals being made while a vehicle was created for siphoning funding off to various Ukrainian oligarchs and political factions.
And who knows who else? Yeah.
And who knows? But that's nothing new for Ukraine either. That's the way it's kind of always been. I mean, Yulia Tymoshenko, the former prime minister who again ran for president and still has, her own party in the Rada, even if it's not as big as it once was. I mean, they call her the gas princess. She is an oligarch herself, of course, and she made her money by purchasing gas from Russia through Ukrainian shady companies and reselling it at a higher a profit. That's how she made her money. And of course, Russia, of course, didn't look favorably on that. But, that's how business in Ukraine has been done, since they got independence. Their oligarchs still control their political and economic system to a very high degree, something that Russia saw to a degree quashed when Putin came and asserted power in the early 2000s in Russia.
All right, well, thank you for that update on Ukraine, Mark. I really appreciate it. Thank you for listening. Special thanks to Mark Sleboda. Follow Mark on Twitter at MarkSleboda1 and on Facebook. Look for his appearances on RT, Sputnik, and other international channels. Around the Empire podcast is independent media, and your support is really important. Pitch in if you can, patreon.com/AroundTheEmpire or paypal.me/AroundTheEmpirePod. There are lots of ways to find and to listen to this podcast. Find it on any mobile podcast app, on the website, AroundTheEmpire.com, on Patreon, or on YouTube. And if you're listening on YouTube, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Follow on Twitter at AroundTheEmpire, and we'll see you next time. Take care, everyone.